Imagine a relaxing getaway in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by serene beauty in a zero-internet zone, a cabin in the middle of the woods, and a beautiful lake nearby. Sounds like the perfect weekend getaway, right? That's what a dumb group of college kids thought until it turned into one of their worst nightmares. If you've seen The Cabin in the Woods, you know it's packed with some of the wildest, most horrifying creatures in horror history, but out of all the monsters lurking in the underground facility, one of the most disturbing has to be the Buckner family. Yes, the one that wins the lottery and has a 100% clearance rate. But unlike a lot of made-up monsters, these zombie creatures weren't an unnatural creation. They were living and breathing in the early 1900s and, more interestingly, are actually based on a real-life family of murderers. Terrifying, isn't it? Today, we're going to dive deep into the origins of the Buckner family, who they are, and what made them so important in the film's ritual. So get ready, because we're diving in. Oh, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Origins. Cabin in the Woods is one of those high-concept movies that pulls you into a different world. It almost feels like a big crossover episode of all the monsters clubbed together, but the Buckners aren't your regular group of creatures. They may look like generic zombies, but they are specifically labeled as redneck torture zombies, which already tells you a lot about what makes them something to be scared of. Unlike the fast-moving infected from 28 Days Later or the classic shuffling corpses from Night of the Living Dead, the Buckners are a bunch of faith-loving, sadistic monsters that work together on hunting nights. We get our first real glimpse of them through their introduction in the movie, specifically a painting left inside Holden's room that's hiding the secret mirror. The painting in itself isn't simply creepy, it's downright gruesome and depicts a brutal murder scene with horrifying details. Each member of the Buckner family is featured in the painting doing what they love the most, killing and torturing the people around them. Looking back, it was an early warning sign for what's to come, but of course, no one picks up on it. Later, as the movie progresses, we find out more details about the daily lives of the Buckner family as the group ventures into the basement and discovers Patience Buckner's diary. We learn more about their nature when, during the bedding scene, the co-workers discuss just how effective these redneck torture zombies have been. They have a solid track record of killing, so much so that the maintenance department bets on them every single year. The Buckner family was inspired by real-life horror stories of violent, isolated families in rural America. The film's creators took cues from infamous cases like the Bloody Benders, which was a 19th century Kansas family who lured travelers to their deaths, and the Sawney Bean family, which was a legendary Scottish family of cannibals. The Buckners simply embody the terrifying idea of an entire family devoted to torture and murder, which really reflects the darkest corners of the human mind. Another primary reason why they stand out is due to the fact that they're not a mindless horde of dumb zombies, but a rather intelligent subvariety of zombies who coordinate their planned attacks amongst themselves and love to mutilate and torment their victims for a long time before finally killing them. They're unapologetically barbarous and nothing but vengeful spirits trapped in rotting bodies, which makes them kinda perfect for the ritual. Just in case you forgot, every year a group of unsuspecting young adults are lured to the cabin in order to perform the sacrifice to appease the ancient gods beneath the earth. The facility's job is to ensure the ritual goes as planned, using an assortment of monsters to execute the killings based on the victim's own choices. This particular group unknowingly summoned the Buckners by reading an old diary in the basement. That should serve as a warning lesson for everybody listening. Never read stuff in Latin from an old creepy basement you don't know anything about, especially when you've seen weird paintings and stuff all around the house. Anyways, this triggered the curse that brought the family back to life, thus making them the executioners for the sacrifice and filling the role of pain and suffering in the ritual. Were the Buckners always monsters? The Buckners weren't always the undead abominations we see in the film. The diary of Patience Buckner that Dana read reveals their tragic past. The Buckners were a bunch of twisted knuckleheads living in the area in the early 1900s and were ruled by their violent patriarch named Father Buckner. He was a religious zealot who believed in punishing his family for their sins. The punishment wasn't limited to the family members either. Torturing and killing outsiders was required as a form of a test in order to prove their faith. Now, we all understand that discipline is necessary in a household, but certainly not the way he wants to do it, because this madman made sure that his wife and children were all subjected to brutal abuse at all times. And no, not like a whip on your hand. Patience recalls her own father cutting out her tongue with a chisel. This insanity couldn't last too long, though. Eventually, the Buckners met a gruesome end, either at the hands of an angry mob or through some supernatural retribution, but death wasn't the end for them. Whatever force governs the ritual at the cabin brought them back and transformed them into killers cursed to repeat their horrifying actions for eternity. The Buckners and the larger horror meta-narrative. One of the most genius aspects of The Cabin in the Woods is how it plays with horror tropes, and the Buckners are a perfect example of this. They represent an entire subgenre of horror that revolves around the idea of an isolated backwoods family inflicting mind-numbing violence on victims. Think about The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Wrong Turn, or House of a Thousand Corpses. All these movies explore the horror of stumbling into an unknown territory and discovering a family of murderers, but these movies don't just inspire the Buckners, they're a literal, controlled element of a ritual that requires these specific type of killers. It's a meta-commentary on horror itself, and it shows how these archetypes exist to fulfill a larger, almost cosmic purpose in storytelling. The Buckners touch on a long tradition of horror rooted in Appalachian folklore and backwoods legends. Stories of cannibals, mountain spirits, and vengeful entities aren't unknown in American folklore, and Cabin in the Woods only dives further into that concept. The idea of the redneck torture zombie is a brilliant subversion of classic zombie tropes. The only difference is, instead of showing them as imbeciles who are simply hungry for flesh, the Buckners are shown as conscious individuals who are seemingly aware of what they're doing. Their decayed bodies might be falling apart, but their minds are still fixated on inflicting suffering, which is what makes them so terrifying. In the film's Ritual, different monsters represent different aspects of horror. Take the werewolf, for example. He'd simply tear you apart, digging into the fear of being hunted by an animal or a ghost that can haunt you to death. But the Buckners take their time. It's not about killing something for them, it's deeper. They want to torment their victims and make them feel the pain. The diary even details how they took pleasure in prolonged torture. Every member of the Buckner family. Hold on to your seats as we take a look at the different family members and what made them the kind of blood-hungry, terrifying monsters they are. Father Buckner. The head of the house was Father Buckner. Judging from his daughter Patience's diary, he's believed to have a critically short temper and a great hatred towards travelers passing by his cabin. We're not entirely sure if it was hatred or pure joy that made him torture them to death, but needless to say, he is the ringleader in their sadistic rituals, praising his sons for killing and punishing anyone who wasn't faithful enough. Physically, he's got short hair and a nasty mark that runs across his mouth, showing his jaw and teeth. It's like his face was forcibly peeled back, and knowing this family, it probably was. He has a rusty look, which just adds to his whole farm-style killer aesthetic, and despite being dead, he's still very much in charge, leading the Buckners in their hunt and making sure they get their sick version of justice. And if you think you can outrun him, think again. This guy moves fast for a decaying corpse. Mother Buckner. If Father Buckner's the cult leader, Mother Buckner is an equally terrifying enforcer. She's covered in deep wounds that are possibly self-inflicted, but more likely were done by her own husband. Her receding hairline and rotting skin make her look even more nightmarish, but you forget to notice that when you see her stomach. You see, at one point, Father Buckner slid open her belly and stuffed it with burning coals. Yeah, you heard that right. This detail is mostly shown in behind-the-scenes featurettes, but even without knowing, you can tell something is deeply wrong with her. She roams around with an old-fashioned wood saw, which might not be the most efficient killing tool, but Mother Buckner is a sadistic zombie, and she wants to take her time. Matthew Buckner. Now, let's talk about the biggest, most terrifying member of the clan, Matthew Buckner. He's so huge, he towers over the rest of them with his long, greasy hair and out-of-fashion suspenders. They say the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, and Matthew proves them right because Father Buckner's son is way more cruel than him. He carries around a bear trap linked to a chain to catch his victims and swings it around to drag them before going in for the kill. If that wasn't enough to send a chill down your spine, here's a horrifying little detail from Patience's diary. The dude gets a sexual thrill from cutting flesh. Now that certainly explains why he's one of the most prominent members of his family. Judah Buckner. If you think you've barely seen this one, that's because he's the type to lurk in the shadows till he gets a perfect moment to strike. His scrawny body has a rat-like appearance with filthy overalls and big-ass buck teeth. This little guy turned an old pair of pruning shears into a stabbing weapon. It might not be fancy, but in the hands of someone like Judah, it's quite effective. Although his main strategy would be to sneak up on his victims and stab them when they least expect it, he's not above using cheap shots. Whether it be stabbing the victims in their weakest spots or trying to maximize their agony with a hunt, Judah is no different from the rest of his family, and it's sad because he just grew up embodying what was around him. This really proves that not everyone capable of procreating should be having kids. Patience Buckner. Patience is perhaps the most tragic figure of the Buckner family, and yet that doesn't make her any less scary. She's the youngest and only daughter who almost had a chance of escaping the madness, up until her family decided to punish her. Dressed in a white dress, she has her black hair tied into braids, and oh yeah, she's missing an entire arm because her family decided to cut it off and eat it. Despite all this, she still follows them in death, all up and ready with her wooden axe. But you gotta give her credit for being the least monstrous of the lot. Even though the poor girl was punished for not being as sadistic as her brothers, she ultimately did end up helping our protagonist towards the end of the movie when she killed the director of the organization. So while she's still a bloodthirsty zombie, she turned out to be essential in ending the whole operation, as well as the Earth. The Buckners' role in the ritual. Looking back, it was probably their familiarity with the forest and terrain that helped the Buckners have an edge over the others. And in the grand scheme of the ritual, that's what made them one of the organization's most reliable monsters and pretty popular in the betting pool. Their horrific murder methods also puts on a show for the people, which, let's be honest, is their only form of entertainment down there. The way they toy with their victims before the kill by either hiding in the shadows or waiting in the RV, it just makes the hunt all the more thrilling. The organization strongly believes that the Buckners will do the deed perfectly and inflict the ritualistic suffering that's needed because it's in their nature to do so. Each horror archetype in the film amounts to a different kind of fear, and the Buckners represent a slow, painful, and inescapable torment. Their horror is also not supernatural, which might be the case for a lot of the monsters. Their killings have a more human origin, which stems from the fact that this was an actual family who did the same thing when they were alive. They know exactly how to deliver strategic brutality and the kind of suffering the Ancient Ones demand. How they compare to the other monsters in the film. Compared to the other creatures in the facility, the Buckners are actually pretty low-tech. No cosmic horror, no advanced shapeshifting, and they even save you a lot of time on cleanup after the deed. Thanks to their sadism, they turn each year's sacrifice into a hunt rather than just a plain murder. Just the way a werewolf will rip you apart because it's driven by instinct, or a ghost might haunt you because it's cursed, the Buckners will kill you because they simply enjoy killing. And that's what makes them way scarier than the rest. Marvelous verdict! These undead, torture-loving maniacs might not be the flashiest monsters on the film's roster, but their brutal and methodical approach to suffering makes them something to be scared of. They aren't driven by hunger or supernatural forces, they kill for the sick pleasure of it, and that, my friends, is what makes them true horror icons. Now, that's a wrap on our deep dive into the Buckners. That said, let us know which monsters from Cabin in the Woods you would choose to do the deed, and let us know if you think you could survive the Buckners, or would you roll the dice with another monster? Let's discuss it down in the comments section, we'll see you there, and if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Thanks for watching,